July, Columbus is having their summer show. We'll be vending out there. Dan helped them run the show out there. Some great events to go off to. And it's not all the way out in the middle of nowhere this year. It's actually pretty close to downtown. Where's it at? It's at the Arboretum. And so that's like basically downtown. So campus, High State campus area. Number one. So look for that information coming out in some newsletter stuff. We'll let Rob talk about his favorite, which is Taylor and Bye. Hi, everybody. My name is Rob Hoffman. And John said, I am Yume-en Bonsai Nursery. And I'm also the vice president of APS. But I have probably close to 1,000 trees at my place. And I'd say more than half of them are black pines. I love black pines. They're so easy to work with. Does anybody have any black pine series? Yeah. No. All right. Well, let's hop into it. There's a lot of information here, guys. A lot of information. So this was a PowerPoint that I did at a different convention. So you guys see something where it says Houston in here. That's why it says Houston. It was better in PowerPoint I did. So, does anybody know where black pines come from? Japanese black pines? What part? Japan, right? What part of Japan?
The island.
Oh, the island. So Japan is an island, yes. But they're coastal trees. So they're not cold hardy trees like white pine or ponderosa pine here. And this is all natural. This is all natural seedling growing on the beaches and stuff of Japan. So this is their habitat. This is all black pines through here.
In Sweden.
Yeah. So this is a mature black pine. So they can get to be about 40 meters tall. It's funny because we put them in bonsai pots. They become real tiny little trees, but you plant them in a yard or you plant them somewhere and they can become that big. And it's really neat. I don't know if anybody can see it or not, but those are all monkey poles that they use to hold the tree up.
I love kind of
So this is kind of the area of where Japanese black pines are grown. And it shows you the different horticultural zones that we have here. Up here in Hokkaido, that's where the white pines are grown. Down here in Kyushu and Shikoku, that's where all the black pines are mainly grown, but they're also grown in all the other coastal areas. So they're actually native to Zone 9. And I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but that's like southern United States, like Florida, Houston area. And this gentleman here actually grows black pine in Hawaii successfully. Pretty amazing. So the history of black pine is pretty neat. So Carl Thunberg is the man that found black pines in Japan. Okay. So has anybody seen the new show Shogun at all?
Yeah.
So this is very, very, very similar to that whole show. So he went over to Japan as a Dutch settler to help bring the economy back to the Dutch. So when he was over there, he got actually sent to a almost like a concentration camp. He was not allowed to leave that area. People did not want to see him. And this was around it was probably around early or late 1700s when he was going. He was about 40 years old. So this was his concentration camp that he lived in and was not allowed to leave. It's called a Dajima. It's on the island of Nagasaki. But it was built to constrain foreigners so none of the Japanese wanted to look at them. So Carl Thunberg named it Pinus thunbergii. So Thunberg was his last name. So while he was at the Dajima, which is the concentration camp, he was appointed the head surgeon, but was never allowed to leave the colony. So people had to actually come to him. He would do the surgery and stay in his area. He traded his knowledge of Western medicine to obtain botanical samples, including the pine, introducing a cure for syphilis for the first time in Japan, thus endearing himself to the Japanese. So I bet she didn't know that syphilis was a part of Japanese black pine. So everybody knows. Right. See, but gotta bring it somehow, right? So in 1776, he was permitted to accompany the director of the Dutch settlement to the shogun in Edo, which was a huge, huge honor for him. During this trip, he collected a large number of Japanese plants and introduced them back to where he was from. So in his travels from the Yume-en, they're very brief because he was the surgeon and they try to keep him there as much as possible. But he never traveled to China. And this is sorry. That's a white pine on the other side there. I'm not a very good person, sorry. There we go. All right, so the different species of black pines, there's all different types. So there's cornbark black pines, there's Japanese black pines, but not true varieties in the horticultural sense, but place names and varies where they grow. So most of these different varieties are actually geographically located. So the stuff that's from Shikoku Island are a certain variety. The stuff that's from Kyushu Island are a certain variety. The Makawa is actually probably one of the most renowned black pines out there. Awaji is different. Awaji is from the Hyogo prefecture. But the Makawa is from the Aichi prefecture. So the Makawa is what all these guys that lead up here. That's all Makawa. So here I'll show you the different varieties, which are actually just locations. So the Ibaraki, the Aichi, the Waji, the Shikoku, that's where all your different varieties come from.
And those are natural genetic variations.
Natural genetic variations. Now, you say this too, but so the cork barks, has anybody ever seen a cork bark before, how they look all gnarly and everything? Do you know how that started? Does anybody know? It was actually a disease. It was a disease that started that. So the vertical fissures in the bark or the fins are what shows you what type of cork bark it is. So there's the river water cork, which is just a single fissure. And then there's two wing where it goes, one grows up, one grows down. There's three wing, four wing, the Fletcher, the regular cork, which is more like a wart bark, and the tortoise shell. So you can see the difference. So this is also a cork bark, but it's totally different than this one. You can see the fins coming out of everything here. So this one would actually be a four wing, where this one's a three wing. You can see the difference. And sometimes the cork will actually make it all the way out to the end of the branch, which is really desirable.
And where do you look for those differentiations? From primary, secondary, tertiary? Or what's that? Where do you look for the marks differences on the tree? Because I'm having trouble seeing what it's like. So am I looking at the primary trunk? Am I looking at
primary branch? You're looking at the tree. So you're looking at the trunk of the tree, okay, right? So all these fins that come out from the tree are what gives you the characteristics of your river water, 2, 3, 4, all the different ones. Thank you. So the Yatsubusa is another variety, but it's a dwarf variety. So it's very slow growing. You have small needles. You can see how small the needles are in this one. But you can also get small needles from decandling. So that's one of the reasons we do decandle, is to get smaller internodes and smaller needles. There's also different variants like the dragon's eye, which makes it look like it's variegated. Some have like twisted or worm needles that aren't straight, but they look kind of like a Goldilocks. That is okay. So our pines, when things grow on pines, they grow in whorls. Does anybody know what a whorl is? Like a wagon wheel. So the problem with that is when we're styling trees, is you only want to have two branches come out from one section of your tree. or you'll get inverse tapers. But you'll also make it so your tree is it's got too much going on in one place. All right. So what you got to do is you're going through these trees and looking at them. You'll see that there are branches on some of them, but you're going to have to take those down to 2 branches. Okay. So this is the branch as it's starting off. So this is your buds that's coming out. So your buds are in the top of your tree. It's on the end of your needles. These are your candles. Everybody's got candles on their trees. So if you look in the center of it, that's where your buds grows from. Now, buds will also grow from your needles. You'll have adventitious buds in your needles. So you can figure out what you're going to do with your tree by pruning and by fertilizing. You can push growth in certain places. But that's your buds. That's what it'll look like once they start off. And you can see if you just let it go unchecked, you're going to have a branch growing this way, a branch growing that way. So that's how your world works. And then this is your leader that's going to grow straight up. So this is what it's supposed to look like now, or a little bit later in the year. This is your candle here. This is this year's growth. This is last year's growth, these needles back here. So when we go to decandle, we're taking this whole thing off to get our shorter ends and shorter needles. Has anybody decandled before? Yeah, a couple people. So needles are one of the best ways to be able to see what you have. So a white pine's needles is different than a black pine's needles. It's different than a red pine needle. So to be able to actually see what you have and what you're working with, you got to know that a black pine, right, is a 2-needle pine. So every needle on here, there's 2 of them. So 2 needles per fascicle. Now a white pine will be 5 needles per fascicle. All right. So here's a white. So you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 needles, whereas the black pine has 2, right? And they're a little bit thicker too on black pine. These little guys, you'll see these sometimes. Those are your cones that are growing out of your tree. If you can, get rid of those unless you're trying to get seed, because it takes away a lot of energy from your tree. So this is an interesting fact. The spiral ring on branches, needles, and cone steels are arranged in the Fibonacci sequence. I don't know if anybody knows that or not, but isn't that cool? You should club pine cones. Okay. So needle buds exist between the needles and the fascicle. So you'll have needle buds down here on the bottom of your needles, and then you have a bud here on the end of your node. So adventitious buds appear at the nodes down here. So adventitious buds will only appear where there's nodes at. So the needle buds are different. Needles are on the end of each needle. So needle buds emerge between 2 needles. Usually, like when you're growing something and you're trying to get back budding, if you do have needle buds, they're usually really weak. So you don't want to try to wire them because they'll just fall off. So what you want to do is you want to let them grow for at least a season to get them a little woody, and then you can wire them. But you don't want to try to wire it and then it just fall off, because then you're losing what you want to use. But all right, so black pines are very free draining soil. They don't like a lot of water. They like to be dry. They do take up a lot of waters, but it's better for them to be in a more dry soil. So you want to have like a bigger particle size. So some of these trees you can see I've repotted, and some have been in like a nursery soil. If you have ones in a nursery soil, next year in the springtime, I would repot it. Because like I said, you don't want to get root rot. You want the tree to be healthy. So you want to have, see how there's big particle sizes on these? That's what you want to have here in your tree. And if for some reason you go to water your trees and you see that the water is just sitting on top, make sure that it drains through and walk you, especially in this heat, guys. Like this heat is pretty crazy. But the nice thing, it's humid, so we're not taking up a lot of water, but you still want to hit that, let it flush everything out. Don't just spray it just because it's wet. You want to let it soak all the way through.
Other like peat moss on the top or anything to keep the moisture in?
So peat moss helps as like a top dressing, and it's also good for the top layer of roots. But at the same time, when you fertilize, you got to be careful with the peat moss that it doesn't make. You can only use organics or not. You don't want to have a bunch of mushrooms there, flies, and stuff around your fertilizer. Anybody ever grow mushrooms off their fertilizer? Or do your dogs try to eat it? My dogs think it's like crack. They love it.
And what? So peat moss is okay. Just keep it managed.
Yeah, keep it managed. Yeah, you don't want to put a whole bunch on. So some of these I actually did put a top dressing on them, but you only want to put a good like half-inch top dressing on them. That don't make it real thick. So the watering and feeding of a black pine is very, very important. So you always want to water thoroughly. Always let the water drain through your pot. So you don't want to just, if it looks wet, you don't want to just spritz it. You want to make sure you always drench it. You don't want to keep the soil wet all the time. You want to let it dry out before you water it again. The young plants, they grow super fast. So once they get a little bit older, they slow down a little bit. So you can use fertilizer cakes, BioGold, anything you guys want to use. I don't like to use organics as much. But on mature plants, you can use BioGold. BioGold's good. But I usually use Osmocote. I'm sure everybody has their own different fertilizer regular they use.
This quick question about your Osmocote. I believe Osmocote's like a 6-month application.
Yeah.
And it's like 1 teaspoon per 1 foot container. Do you just, it's how you measure out 1 teaspoon, and do you fertilize once per year? Do you multiple?
I actually go a lot heavier because I like to push trees a lot more. I usually do a tablespoon per container.
But then do you reapply multiple times per year, or does it?
I only use it once a year, but I use multiple things with it.
So you supplement?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. They're already sitting on that. Better be like your heat. As how can you go through the 3 months of mine?
And it also depends on temperature.
And yeah,
Yeah. So pests and disease is a big one for trees. Any tree really. Some of the big ones on pines are pine street moss. So sometimes they're so aggressive. A moth will land on the tip of your pine, and then you'll be watering your tree, and all of a sudden you'll see your tree doing this. Why is it moving like that? Well, there's little worms up here that are just chomping your tree, and they'll eat a big section of your tree within a short amount of time. So you got to watch out for those guys. You can just knock them off. They're not hard to get rid of, and then you can spray with a systemic. The other thing with pine is that diseases is
innovation.
There it is. So aphids. Anybody seen these before?
Yeah.
They're horrible. I hate aphids. But you gotta get rid of them. If they're not too bad, you can take a spray, like a water, and spray them off. But then you still want to spray your tree. So typically pine aphids are not a problem in Houston, but they are a problem where we live. But easy is controlled with a forceful water spray and knock the aphids off the tree. Borers are a little bit harder to find. Because borers start in at the soil and then they come up to your trunk and they eat. They're really small. They're really tiny. But if you look at your tree, you'll see like a little hole in your tree. And then below that hole, you guys will see like, it's called frass or surface. It's like a orangish kind of, it's a byproduct of what they're eating. So as they're going in, they're mining out what they're eating, and you'll see that at the bottom of that hole. So if you guys see a big thing of sawdust under a hole, you need to have a board. And you don't want to have a board because they'll go in and they'll eat all the camping of your tree and kill it. they're hard to see. So seeing that little piece of sawdust on your trunk is really important. So, but a good way to get rid of them, if they are in the tree, is a little syringe of lindane in the hole and kill more.
Would some kind of systemic get rid of?
A systemic would too, but if they're already in there, you want to shoot them with that first. The systemic should be done before you have the board, right? So you're supposed to do a systemic on more. There's 5 full days of 50-degree weather. This one you're supposed to spray. So here's the tip moth I was showing you guys, but you can see how like this was this is the candle that came up like this. You can see how they just ate it down that nub. And that's what they look like, is that little guy right there. But usually there's a bunch of them. And this right here, this is the biggest part of my needle cast. So needle cast is really easy to get, but it's also really easy to get rid of. So if you get your trees too wet, or if you water your foliage a lot, you're going to get needle cast. And also, if you're watering and you have needle cast and your water hits this and bounces to another tree, like the water droplets, that tree next to it now has needle cast. So you got to be careful with it. It's not super detrimental unless you have it like really bad on your tree. But a really good way to notice if you have it, see all these, can you guys see this up here?
Yeah.
You see all these bands and spots? So that's needle cast. If you see bands and spots on your needles, if it's not bad, you can take and pluck some of them off. But if it's really bad, you want to go through and put a systemic in it, or like mangazeb or daconil, some kind of copper fungicide really works well for needle cast. But that's mainly what they look like when you get them. So needle cast is a general term for a foliar disease on pines, which causes small spots or lesions on the needles, most commonly on black flame. Most needle casts infect young, newly formed needles in the late spring or early summer, but symptoms do not begin to develop until the following season. So even if you guys are making your tree like really wet right now, you might not see the needle cast until next year. So that's why you got to kind of watch your watering schedule. When you water a pine, you don't want to water it overhead and just water everything. You want to try to water just the base and the roots. Now, if it's super, super hot out, you can always go through and kind of mist it to kind of cool your tree down. But I wouldn't make that a practice of like watering everything from overhead all the time. So the first symptoms of it are the little yellow spots on the needles, less than a year old. The yellow spots turn brown and expand to form bands of discoloration. And then the tips of the needles and tissue between the multiple bands turn brown and die. So infected needles will begin to prematurely drop in the late spring and throughout the summer. And on severely diseased trees, all needles from previous season may be lost. Which is bad because you need those needles to give you hormones for your tree to grow during the season. So it really weakens your tree. It's not necessarily going to kill your tree, but you always want to think of your tree as like a battery. So through the season in the winter time, right after winter hits in the spring, you're losing all your energy because you're pushing out new growth, right? So once that new growth pushes out and hardens off, then you're starting to get energy back again. So once you get that energy back again, you want to start to build your battery for the next year. So you want to have more energy in your tree than you did in the previous winter, right? So if you have a disease or you have pests, that's severely making your energy less in your tree. So that's not what we want. We want to try to get rid of pests, get rid of disease, and just make your tree happy and healthy. So like I was saying, the treatment is a spray of copper fungicide in the early spring before the buds begin to push. And then if you do have it during the season, you'd want to spray with the same thing, daconil, funganyl, bravo, like every other week for 3 sessions. So within 6 weeks. So you go 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and do a spray. Okay? Does everybody understand that? Does anybody have any questions about that? It's really easy to get needle cast on your pines, but it's not easy. I mean, it is easy also to get rid of it. So we need to really think about that going through here.
Can you go back? I'm sorry. The decandle. Oh, what is the?
Daconil, Funginil, Bravo, and then Mancozeb is another one.
Okay. Did you say they hit it treatment?
Every 2 weeks. Yep. But you still want to do the early spring way if you can before everything pushes out. That way that when it does push out, it's been hit, so it's already good to go. Did you get that?
Yep, I did.
So now we're going to talk about development a little bit. This is like that. So you've heard about decandling.
Yeah.
Who knows exactly what it is? Anybody know what it is? Yeah. A lot of people. There's so many different ways to do it. Me personally, I'm going to show you guys how I do it. I have so many black pines that I'm not able to do like a quarter, half, 3/4. It would take me forever to do it. So what I do is I do it by size of the tree. So the biggest trees get done first. So that way they have more time to grow and get their needles to be the size of the tree. Now my showy or smaller trees get done later in June because we don't need the needles to be as long, right? So you'll hear a lot about needle plucking, balancing energy. That's how we take care of black pines. So if this is your first tree, the best advice is, all right? So some people, everybody wants a bonsai right now. Well, it's not how it works, you guys. We have to have patience. We can't just, we can wire this tree and make it look more finished, but it's not going to have the right structure. It's not going to look right. It's not going to, once it starts to grow, you're not going to have the branches where you need them to be. So when we first get a tree, we balance the energy, but we also, if it's a small tree, right? Like if it's a stick in a pot, we want to let it grow. But if it's a nicer tree like we have here, a refined tree, we're going to cut back to what we need and then make our tree out of that. So your pine is in development and the texture you hear about for refinement. So the objectives of growing pines in development are, so you want to get a big trunk, right? You want to get good movement in that trunk. You want to get a tapered trunk. So a lot of people, when they're looking for trees, especially newer people, they look at the foliage, and the foliage is the last thing you want to look at. You want to look at the trunk. You want to see where your front is on your tree. You want to see how much good movement you have in your tree. And we can grow branches later. We're not worried about the big green helmet. We're just worrying about how our tree looks in the movement of the trunk. And a lot of people, even people that are intermediate and advanced, they still look at the foliage of stuff, but it's like the last thing you want to look at. Another thing that's really important in development is making sure we get back budding. So back budding on a tree, does anybody know how we get back budding? That's one way. But the other way is to fertilize. And once you fertilize and you see all that energy, I mean, this is all of this year's growth. All this right here is this year's growth. Everything I've been. So you can tell this has been a really healthy tree. That's all this year's growth from year to year. So if I go to cut this back now and decandle this, I'm going to get back buds everywhere. But if you have a tree that's only coming out and growing like this much a year, you might not want to cut it back. You might not want to decandle it because it's not healthy enough. But if you do that, it's going to take away more energy. If it's already not putting out energy and you take away more, there could be problems. Nursery soil is not bad for like starts, but Akadama is one of the best soils you can use for root development. So that's why I use this. You can use nursery soil if you wanted to. You just got to. You're going to have a totally different water schedule though, from one to another. And like I said, you don't want to keep it wet all the time. So the bigger particles are actually better for your tree.
Excuse me, I have a question, well, you might not answer it, that's right. If you just have one sacrifice branch, or are there several at a time?
You can have multiple. Yeah, you can have multiple. But you got to remember, the sacrifice branches are something that you're not going to use. So you got to make sure that in your design that you don't need that branch. If you're going to run it really long, it's going to get. See how this is the tree is this only this down here, but this is the sacrifice branch up here. So you can see how much bigger it actually is than the tree. So eventually, this whole thing is going to get cut off like way down here.
Would it be fair to say that your sacrifice branch is the solar panel for your battery charging?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about sacrifice branches? No. So you can see how big they are. So this is the tree way down here. And look at that. It's as big as its arm. That's all sacrifice branches. All of those. But the trees are only this big.
See, what about actually pruning the sacrifice branch? Do you?
So yeah, you do prune it. So if you notice, remember we were talking about whorls before? So this, you can see that. See how that's inverse taper there, inverse taper? That's where the whorls were at. So what you want to do on your sacrifice branches, you don't want to have a bunch of foliage on it. You're just using it to thicken your tree, right? But you don't want to shade out the rest of the tree. So what you do is you take all the foliage off except from the very top. So it still has solar panels and it's growing up, but you're not shading out the rest of your tree and losing your branches. Hey. So and the thing too, you can cut that off and grow another sacrifice branch if you want. Or if you wanted to, you could use your sacrifice branch and wire it and actually make a gin out of it. Put it movement in it and then use it as a gin feature later and then grow a new sacrifice branch. And so, you know what I mean? So you have actually movement in your gin. So this is important. This is your final branch candidate. So this is where you find your structure of your tree. So these branches are in possible positions for a credible final tree. And a deciduous tree, you can please finish a trunk before you start a single branch. So you could take a deciduous tree, cut all the branches off, and grow a brand new tree off your trunk. But you can't do that with pines. You have to have some sort of needle mass to grow, right? So if you cut your branch off, there's no needles on it, that branch is dead. You're not growing another branch off that. So not so with pines. So with pines, the final branches have to be there, okay? They have to start off. Or you can grow one later down the road off of a bud, but the trunks have to be there if you're using them. Or you'll never get a branch. They have to be maintained throughout this whole process of development. So from the start of these branches that you're using, that's what your structure, your bones are built off of. So this, everybody should probably take this picture or take a picture of this or take notes of this. This is really important, the seasonal care of your pine.
God.
So whenever we get a tree, and we're not going to do it today with you guys because we're going to work on the trees, but whenever you get any type of black pine, the first thing you want to do is needle pluck it. You want to balance the energy of your tree. So what you'll do is you'll go to your tree and you'll start plucking needles on the bottom of the tree because no needles need to be growing straight down, no branches need to be going straight down. So you won't need those needles down there. But you want to keep needles on the side because that's where you want your buds to grow from, right? So the first thing you're going to do is needle pluck. So you want to, like I said, balance the energy of your tree. So in spring we're candle pinching and fertilizing. In summer, we're candle pruning and summer needle pulling. Now, if you've already needle plucked, you don't need to needle pluck again. So in summer too, this is really important. If you're gonna do your candle pruning, right? You want to remove your fertilizer. Does anybody know why that is? Anybody have any idea why you would remove your fertilizer? So when we're candle pruning and we're cutting everything back, right? What that does is that pushes all that energy back into your tree. That's why you'll get back budding. You'll get a new whorl growing on where you cut at. So when you take that fertilizer off, what's our goal for candle pruning? We want shorter internodes and shorter needles, right? So if we want shorter stuff and more compact, we don't want to put nitrogen in it, right? Because then what's going to happen? You're going to get longer internodes and longer needles. So that's the exact opposite of what you want to do. So whenever you, like around June, when you guys are candle pruning, you want to take off all your fertilizer.
What about like
On black pines.
yeah, I was gonna say what about like a zero jet?
Cool. You want to take out all your fertilizer.
Okay. All right.
All your fertilizer.
Be careful.
So you reintroduce the fertilizer when the summer shoots hard off. Okay. So in fall, we're needle thinning again because we've already got 2 flushes of growth, and we're reducing the pair of number of candles on each branch tip. So if anybody remembers that floral picture that I showed you of the buds, how there's that 1 leader and then there's like 5 buds around it. So when that happens, we would come in here in the fall, November, December, and our growth that we have, we would cut that down to 2. So as you can see on this one, it's kind of hard to see it from here, but there's 7 buds. So I'd have 7 branches coming out. So if I take and I cut all those buds off for all the growth to 2, so now I only have 2, right? Now I have 2 branches. So each time we do that, it's a multiple flush tree, so we can do that. In Ohio, we can do it twice a year. In Florida, you might be able to do it 3 times a year. But here, so what happens is when you do that candle pruning, it helps you to refine your tree. So when you're cutting down to 2, now you got 2. The next time you do it, you'll have 4. So you got 4 branches. Next time after that, you'll have 8. So that's how you start to refine your branch structure of your tree, is by doing your candle pruning. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, so in wintertime, we're not doing quite as much in wintertime. You can thin the needle a little bit, but that's when you can do all your big heavy work, all your wiring, your heavy bending, wedge cuts, that kind of thing is what you want to do in the wintertime. Now it says repotting. That's if you have greenhouses. That's if you can take and have the active care for that tree. So repotting it only if you can keep it above freezing. Because pines don't like to freeze. At least black pines don't like to freeze.
When was your repot?
Spring.
Spring.
Right? You'll see on a black pine, you'll see the bud will start to swell and get fat. And as soon as that happens, that's when you want to repot. It's the best time to repot. So you can see how much fertilizer you want to use. You're not just putting 1 cake on there. You're putting a lot of fertilizer on this thing to push it. So you want to start off light if it's a smaller tree, but then you should be heavily approaching the can all the time. Put all that energy in your tree. So when you cut that back, you're getting all that energy pushed out into your tree. Does that make sense? Just before decandling, my pots are filled with fertilizer cakes, and I provide liquid fertilizer once a week. So I switch it up. I don't just use one type of fertilizer. I'll use like fish emulsion, Miracle Grow, Osmond Coat, BioCoat. I use all kinds of different stuff to get different kinds of push to my trees.
Look at this.
So you can also tell by your candles which ones are strong and which ones are weak. So of course this one is super strong. So if you guys are really happy with your tree and it's springtime, you can go through and actually break some candles if they're really long to promote backbudding a little bit. This is not the same thing as decandling. You're just breaking your buds in half or whatever you want to do to get the same thing. You're pushing that energy back in your tree when you're doing that. So in the tips of your trees, there's a hormone that promotes growth. So when you go and you cut that or break that, all of that hormone is now down here. So it's pushing the tree down here instead of up here. So then you're going to get back budding along that area. So what you want to do is you wait until the needles develop to this stage. This is about what they want to look like when they're starting to emerge from the extending candle. So you grasp the candle above the neck and then make sure the emerging needles below the point, you break the candle. So these little needles here is where you break it. So then you'll start getting buds from all those needles. So then you break the candles off to the length of the weaker shoots, about the same size to keep everything balanced. Remember, the most vigorous candles leave the weaker ones alone. So if there's really small candles, you don't want to break those. You just want to break the ones that are super, super strong. So that's the before of it, of what you would do. So really all we're doing is pitching these big ones here. So this is where everybody wants to know, what is decandling and when do I do it? So decandling is done to stimulate back budding, activate dormant adventitious buds on woody branches of the tree. This will allow you to shorten branches, making the tree more compact and aid in the development of branch taper. So those are really important things in doing your bonsai, guys. Is you don't want to have a tree that's all one size. You want to make sure that the tree goes from big to small. And then you're also trying to regulate the structure and pattern of growth of branches. This will allow you to shorten the internodes and make a more compact and denser tree as well. You also are doing decandling to balance the energy. You want everything to grow equally and eliminate strong and weak areas on the tree. You're also doing it to reduce the needle length. Okay, so things to consider on a black pine: either tree's health, how healthy is your tree? If it's not a strong tree or you got problems with it, don't decandle it. Wait till next year. That's because you can really make problems for yourself if you know it's already weak. And you're like, I want to keep the needle small. I want to get the internode small. Maybe I should just decandle it. Well, then you might have problems down the road when your tree's too weak. Then when it's too weak, you can get other things like diseases, pests, and dieback. So only decandle if the tree's been fed heavily all year long. Timing, that's what I was telling you guys. On timing on a big tree, I start earlier in June to get the needle length the right size. And then a smaller tree, I'll start later. If you guys can't finish a tree in one day, it's not a big deal. Just let you know, just finish the tree when you can. So shoot strength. So these are all your shoots. Relative shoot strength affects the decision of when to cut. So whether or not to leave a stub, how many needles do I pull? So am I working with big candles stronger or little candles weaker? So that's what you guys are trying to think when you're doing this is, are my candles really strong? Are they really weak? And how am I going to balance that? So to produce stronger summer growth in weaker areas, cut earlier, leave more needles, and don't leave a stub. To produce weaker summer growth in strong areas, cut later, pull more needles, and leave long stubs. That's really important when you guys are growing your trees, is how to do that. So, and then the aftercare is really important for any tree whenever you guys are working on anything. So when you are doing big bends, or if you're doing decandling, or anything you're doing that's weeping your tree, never put it back out in full sun when you're done with it. Give it at least a week in shade. And then maybe the next week after that, you do like morning sun, and then let it eventually bring it back out into full sun. Or you're taking off all these solar panels off this tree, and then you're putting it out in full sun. It's almost like for us, it would be like going out without sunscreen, and you're going to burn yourself, you know?
Are we going to be able to get a copy of this on the website?
I can actually, if you guys want to leave me your emails, I can send these out to everybody.
All right, thank you.
And then the aftercare, remove fertilizer to slow summer growth. Leaving fertilizer in place after decandling gives summer shoots a boost. Overwatering yields longer needles, and that's very, very, very true, guys. If you're overwatering a lot, your needles are going to get super long. And that's more prevalent on ponderosas. If you water a lot of ponderosas, you can get super long needles. Okay, so this was pretty important too. Judging the health of your pines is tricky because they will take 2 to 3 years to become healthy if they are sick. But given poor conditions, will continue to grow 1 to 2 years before acting adversely. So I don't know if some of you guys know this, but your trees can actually be dead for 6 months or so, and you not know it. And it takes a while for it to catch up. So you really got to pay attention to your trees when you're working on them to make sure that they're healthy enough to be worked on. Especially if you guys are coming to workshops and you're bring your own tree workshops. Look at your tree before you come in. Clean it up because it'll give you extra time to work with the artist. But make sure, first of all, it's a healthy tree that you're bringing in to work on. If you don't want to bring it in, then you're not able to work on the tree, right? So the color of the needles is very important. You want it to be dark green. A healthy tree will have shiny dark green needles with no twisting. The needles will generally be stiff and strong. Yellow needles may need poor fertilization or insects, and brown tips or banded needles will probably indicate improper watering or needle cast. Interior buds is really important on a tree. You don't want to have all your foliage out on the tips of your tree. You want to have small braids inside. And strong tip growth is really important too. So in the spring, what you're going to do, like we talked before, is this was to be a really vigorous candle. So we would pinch that to get that. And then you would prune these late or pull old needles and leave a larger stub. Prune these early. Do not pull old needles and leave a smaller stub. So if it's weak like this, don't mess with it. If it's like this, you can still decandle it. But if it's real weak, just leave it alone. Because if you go to candle print it, it's probably not going to make it in. It's going to dry up. So these just show you the different strengths of a tree. And then this is the bigger. So on a tree, the weakest area is always going to be the lowest or underneath stuff, and the most vigorous is going to be your top. So timing. Remove weak shoots first, the medium strength shoots, and about 10 days later, and the strong shoots 10 days after that. The process takes 20 days to complete. I don't have time for that. I have no time for that at all. I have too many trees to sit there and do half and half and 3/4. So what I do, and I'll show you guys, is I just go through some decandling. So you're taking off all of this year's growths. So you can kind of see over here, see how this year's growths are still green. So what you're going to do is you're just going to the 1/8 inch stub at the bottom, and you're going to cut everything. Unless it's that really weak that we talked about. But you're going to go through and cut all of this year's growth off.
So you guys up in the front corner, see that?
So the whole thing. And then what you can do, because you're supposed to do the 10 days, 10 days, 10 days, because that's supposed to help balance everything. So you're doing that. Like you would start off with the bigger stuff, the smaller stuff will go last. So what we're doing now, so what we're doing now is we're going to take everything off, and the way we're going to balance it is by needle plucking. So we're going to use all of our needle plucking to balance the energy, and not our candle pruning. Does that make sense? So our candle pruning is you got to take care of our inner edge. Whereas our needle plucking is going to take care of our balance of energy. And I'm not going to cut this. I'm going to leave this on because this is our what?
Sackcloth.
Right.
So before you do all this, you already decided the shape of your tree from the, as you said in the beginning, most people look at the tree itself, not the structure that they're correct.
Right. So at right now, like I've not done anything to this tree yet. So all I'm doing right now is going through and just taking off all the this year's growth.
Yeah.
But later we can go back, and if there's a branch that I don't want, I'm just doing this to show everybody. But if there's a branch I don't want, I can always take that off later.
My question was more of a sequence thing, and
Yeah, I mean, so when you're doing your candle pruning, you're already going to have a tree that's the size you want it to be. So candle pruning is for refining your tree. If it's in development,
then stuff.
you're not going to do the candle pruning. You're still at its growth. Does anybody have any questions about that yet? No? Okay. So this is,
Can we mention it?
there we go. So this is what I was trying to show you guys. This is this year's growth. So this green stuff here is this year's growth. This over here is last year's growth, right? So you're cutting back the bottom of this year's growth, and leaving a small little stub. That way. Again, I don't have time to call that. So that's how we balance it. Is I don't know if you guys saw that or no. I went too fast. There we go. So that's after we cut the candle. So you see all the needles there. The next point of balancing it is taking the needles out and balancing everything out by needle plucking. So if you want to leave around 12 to 14 pairs. So when I say pairs, remember how I said that every fascicle has 2 needles? So each fascicle will be 2 needles. So you want to leave 12 to 14 pairs of needles on the end of it. So this will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 6 pairs of needles.
And by doing that, what are you telling the tree to do?
You're balancing. That's how you're balancing the energy of your tree.
Just by saying I need more and
Right. So let's just say that you guys are trying to grow your bottom branch out, right? So if you're growing your bottom branch out, but you still want to refine your tree, what would you do? What would you do to that bottom branch if you wanted it to be a longer branch?
you leave more needles.
You would leave more needles, but you would also not candle for it. You would almost be like your sacrifice branch. You would let it grow out and thicken. Then you could go and cut it back once you got it to the desired lengths, right? So this is after a couple weeks. You can start to see all your new buds pop out from where you cut at. And then that's after a couple weeks more. When they're like this and you guys see your little buds like this, don't do anything to them. Just let them go. Just let them go. Don't touch them at all. Summertime, don't touch them. Let them go. Just let them go. And in the fall, that's when we go back and cut it back to how many?
2 to 10. How much?
So this is what it looks starting to look really good. Needles start to open up. See how small the needles are compared to how they used to be? That's from candle pruning. So in summer, when you fertilize, you want to, when you're decandling, what are we doing? We're stop fertilizing. So you resume fertilization as summer growths begin to harden. By the end of summer, August, September, you should be fertilizing again. So, but only half as much you did in the spring. So in the springtime, we really want to throw a lot of fertilizer on this thing. But in fall, that's when you get your vascular growth. So you get your thickening of your tree. So you still want to have fertilizer in your system, but you want to drastically reduce it. So about by half. So spring fertilization prepares your tree for decandling and growth down the road. But your summer and fall fertilization prepares the tree for dormancy. So that's really important because your trees are sitting there for almost 6 months out of the year in dormancy here in Ohio. Fine, depending on the greenhouse. So fall maintenance. So why do we pull needles? To reduce the food production, decreasing the number of needles on a tree slows food production. It also encourages trees to push new buds, to increase light and air, because that's how we get new buds, is by opening a tree up. And it also helps with insects or diseases. And the main reason is to balance the energy. Some decandling techniques require leaving different numbers of needles in different areas, reducing food production in strong areas by removing needles to help balance the vigor. So does everybody understand needle plucking is like the best way to balance your tree? Okay. So for the most vigorous areas, you want to have 6 to 8 needle sets. So like on the top of a tree, you might want to leave a few more or a few less needles. But on the bottom of your tree, you might want to leave a few more needles, just because this grows faster than that stuff. It should be. So a lot of people use tools to do needle plucking. I use my fingers; it's a lot faster. But you can always use tweezers if you want to. But that's what you always want a tool out. You never want to don't pull towards the trunk because you can take it and it can actually pull the bark off. So you always want to pull wherever that fascicle is. You pull away from the fascicle. You don't pull to the fascicle. That makes sense. And another really important thing with black pines, guys, is when you're working on your trees today, you never want to go like this. You never want to take your hand and go into the tree like that because you're going to break your needles, you break your branches. So you kind of want to do the Miyagi method, the wax on, wax off method. So you want to come in from the bottom, right? And then you come up from the bottom with your hand, and it won't break the needles. If you ever work on a pine by yourself and it's one of your first times and you're wiring everything and you're thinking you're all good, wait about a week or two later till you see all your needles break in half and the ends of them die off, and it's kind of frustrating. But if you work with your hands kind of going up in through the tree and not like at the tree, it really helps a lot. Because
Not intelligent. Then
so see, this is what happens when you're pulling back, is you can pull a whole piece of the bark off. So as you pull needles, you'll find nodes where multiple summer shoots have developed. So you can see this is before the fall. So this is where we have not cut back yet to two. So this one right here in the bottom would come off, because what you want to do when you select your two is you want to make sure that they're an acute angle. You don't want to have two buds that are like this. You want to have them nice and close together. You don't want your buds to be grown down. You want them to be growing out. So again, if you go to two, that can be your branch, right? So you have two. Next time would have four. So you want to keep everything in that outer direction. That down. So this is the distance of what it looks like. That's before needle thinning, and this is after. See how much nicer that looks? Especially look at the tops too. Like, see how much that's been thinned? So repotting is really important too, but we repot way too much here. Way too much. Especially with black pines, because they need that mycorrhiza to help them grow. So you don't want to repot too often because it will get rid of your mycorrhiza. And when you do repot, if you do have mycorrhiza in your pot, you want to make sure that you use some of that soil in your new repot. Does everybody know that?
briefly, can you just explain what mycorrhiza is and what it does?
So mycorrhiza is a mycelium. So it's like a fungus that helps intake water. It's almost. I'm sure I have some here. So it is.
Can you express this whole?
So if this is all mycorrhiza here on the bottom, or it's kind of hard to see, but it's all white. But it's like a small fungus, but it helps take up nutrients. I might actually have a picture of it again. But you don't want to transplant too often, because it does take a pine to start a couple of years to actually reestablish, because all the strength of a pine is in its roots. So you never, ever, ever, ever want to completely bare root a tree. Now, if there's bad soil on the tree, you can take that off, but you never want to take in like a water hose and wash the roots off. Then work the sides. You can remove a bit more soil from younger, bigger trees than from older steps. That's very true. And there you go. See all this right here? That's all mycorrhiza. It's a good time. Continue to show you how to take off some of the tools for repotting. I like to use a single prong root hook because it's easier to control than three. Sometimes you can tear a lot of stuff with three of them. But that's kind of the root work you want to do, is go through and cut off big fat roots, leave the little roots, the little fine roots. So now see how it's nice and flat, everything's cut back. That's what you want it to look like. So you comb out the root ball. Has anybody repotted black pine before? Anybody? Yeah.
So this is the work you want to do. That's the root hook I like to use because it doesn't care as much. You want to go through any kind of roots that are strangling other roots out. You want to go through and cut them off. That's the finished product of what it should look like. Nice and clean. You put the tree back in the pot. There you go. Good for another 3 to 4 years. All right. So that's it for that. Does anybody have any questions about the actual decandling process? No.
Can you show the new growth cut? And just do a little pusher. When you were cutting, you said that you were cutting by the green, the nuclear?
Yeah, so this, you can see how this can get drained. So this from here, see the needles?
Yeah.
So from there to here, that's this year's break.
Like, so you're gonna cut
So you just done it just right here. You just need like an eighth of an inch of
cobweb.
So prick it.
sure.
Let's up with that.
Oof. So when we're working on our pines, I guess on decandling, you would go through and you would take needle plug as you're going. Or if you wanted to, you can cut off all the candles and then go back and needle plug. But I do it as I go. So you're taking all the needles off the bottom of the branch out to the end, and then you're leaving second year needles, small ring around it. So this is last year's growth, and everything behind that is 3 years ago growth. So this is 2 years ago, 3 years ago, as we already just cut off this year's growth. Any questions?
Do you leave any of your pines out all winter?
Not my black pines.
The size you don't?
Not my black pines. All those go in my greenhouse. I'll leave my white pines out. I leave my ponderosas out, but I do not leave my black pines out.
I feel strong.
Well, that's different. Like you can leave them out at their field.
Containers, pot and pot.
I didn't say.
Yeah.
I don't think it.
Well, you live down here too. It's a little cooler up where I'm at. I think you guys are a little warmer down here, but not too much. But
So what happens when you leave? I've left mine now. It's a couple of years.
It's not that anything will happen to them per se. If it's too cold, or they'll freeze and die.
Yeah, I've got them sheltered in.
But if you got them sheltered in a good area and they're not going to freeze and die and transpire, then they're fine. If it's something you've done for a long time and you know it works, then that's cool. That's good. But if it's something you guys are not sure about, I would go ahead and just put them somewhere. I always put my greenhouse. I spent too much money on my trees for them to freeze over. Because it got -30 last year. I mean, no tree's going to survive that.
What about like a garage? How to heat a garage?
Yeah, that's fine too. Like I said, you don't want it. Like they don't want to get below 20. Flame green, it's too cold for them. Not saying. I'm just saying something could happen. I don't want to tell you like you can't put them outside. You can, but there's always a better chance of something happening if you leave them outside.
We should.
So in general, cold frame should be adequate in this location.
Right. All right. It doesn't have to be a greenhouse.
Severe cold snap, maybe try to make sure that you get them all isolated.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So, does anybody have any questions at all about black tones?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, these guys.
Jump in.